Hello everyone, this is Joe here. I'm going to show you a quick tutorial on how to assemble your project in Unity and submit it to Knoll. So, as you can see, we have our basic scene in Unity here. Let me zoom out so you can see where the camera is, so we know this is the 0 mark. So, once you have your Unity open, and if you make sure that it's started in with the 2D template, just to make things a little easier going on. If you find yourself having trouble with that, just creating it, and like things aren't following exactly, just start a new project and make sure it's set to 2D template. So, what we want to do now. So we want to. Here's how we get started. So first thing we want to do is import our explosion sprite sheet into Unity. If you remember how to do that, you can skip ahead a minute or two, but I will run through it just for a refresher. So first off, down in our project window here, want to find our assets folder, which is open by default, and inside it, right click and import new asset. Normally, like you would, never mind. Anyway, import new asset, and this is where you would go and find your image wherever you've saved it. Mine's a little buried, so bear with me here. Uh, Currently, my explosion is still a work in progress, so I can't bring it in for this example. So I'm just going to use the same sprite sheet we used earlier in the week, just because it's a nice one to work with. It's nice and small, straight to the point. Anyway, so you click, once you found it, select and click import, and it is now in Unity. So the next thing you want to do is make sure it's set to sprite mode. So in the inspector window over here, you will see this. The first thing is texture type. And currently, because I started with the 2D template, it says sprite 2D and UI. If it doesn't say that, just click on that little box and you will have all these options here. Just scroll till you find 2D and UI sprite, select it, and you're good to go. Next, we want to change the sprite mode from single to multiple. The reason we do this is now Unity knows that, oh, this is a sprite sheet, not just a single sprite. So now we can easily divide it up and get all of our individual frames ready for animation. So with that done, we click apply because we don't need to change any of the other options currently. A lot of that is simply for image optimization, and your game director or whoever, when you're working, they'll likely have the settings for you. So you can just ask them what to set it to, and you should be good from there. So the next thing we need to do is now divide our image up. So we go up to find this button called Sprite Editor, select it, and we now have our Sprite Editor window open. Now, my image itself is currently set at 256 by 256, and each character is set in a 64 by 64 frame. Hello, one. Uh, so with this, for me, it's very easy for me to divide it up and have, rather accurate uh, sprites. For yours, I'm not sure what your image dimensions are, but make sure you check them and make sure they can divide evenly. Uh, yeah, you can divide it evenly with each sprite being in its own frame. The reason I say this is because I know the example Noel put up, when the explosion starts to fade out, it breaks into a lot of smaller pieces. And if you use the automatic trimming, it's going to create each of those pieces as its own sprite rather than, the one whole like circle kind of like fading explosion thing. And that could be a bit of a problem. But on a whole, Unity is very good about creating that. So here's what we do. Up at the top here where it says slice, you click that and it creates this little drop down window. You can try automatic at the start and see how you like it. If it works for you, then feel free to roll with it. There's no problem with it at all. But if you're having issues, as it even says, to obtain more accurate slicing results, manual slicing is recommended. So that's what I'm going to do. I will go to grid by cell size, and you see the default is 64 by 64, which for me is perfect. But you set it to whatever you need. You can figure that out in Photoshop and whatnot. Anyway, you just click the slice button, and it's really hard to see, but if you look closely, you'll now have these little white lines separating your objects, and that will indicate that everything is now done. So you click apply to make sure it's applied, and you can close your window, and down here in your assets, this little arrow will have appeared beside your sprite sheet. Click that to open it up, and you will see all of your little sprites. Now, like I said, if you have any issues with it, try doing it manually or whatever. Or you can call me up, hit me up through email or something, and I'll see what I can do to help. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create our animation clip for our explosion. So in your case, you're going to want to use all of your sprites, but in mine, I'm just going to use 3 for this example. I will try to keep the naming, as explosion to not confuse anyone. So to simply create your animation clip, select your first frame of your animation, hold Shift, select your final frame. So now once they're all highlighted, just click, hold, and drag them into your hierarchy. This will now prompt a window to ask you to create a new animation. So I'm going to call this explosion anim. As you can see, I write in what's known as camel casing, which is basically the first word does not have a capital, but the next word has every word after that will have capitals, so it's kind of like camel humps. Apparently, from what I hear, this is good practice for the industry. I'm not sure how important it is for this project, but this is just what I've heard, so I'm just letting you know. Anyway, now we can save that. Just save it to wherever you want within Unity. I'm just going to save it under Assets. So I'm not going to create any extra folders. But if you do want to, just for organization's sake, simply just right-click in the project window, create folder, and then name it whatever. Now, as you can see, we've created 2 new objects. So we have first our animation clip called Explosion Anim. This is the important one we will be using. The next thing we have, which for me is over here, is the animation controller. This is something for the programmers to use, and honestly, for the most part, I think if you were doing this in a studio or whatever, all you would have to do is simply give it the proper name and move it to the appropriate folder. It's easy enough, but for us, for this, don't worry about it at all. So, with that done, first off, as you can see, the camera is sitting in the way of our explosion. So what we want to do is just select our camera, go over to the inspector window, find the name of the camera, and you'll see this blue box with a check mark in it beside it. Click that to disable our camera. We don't need it right now. And honestly, for this project, not sure we'll need it at all, but hey. Anyway, it's now disabled. Next thing we want to do is select our explosion animation object here, and simply make sure you select it in the hierarchy, not anywhere else, and simply delete it because it's wasted space. Excuse me, I am very sorry about that. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to create a placeholder object for our explosion. This will be more handy later, not so much for the explosion itself, but it's good practice anyway. So what we need is a placeholder object with a sprite renderer on it. Now, we could use an empty game object and just in the inspector add a sprite renderer, but there is an easier way to do. Just in your project window, select the first frame of your sprite sheet, just the first frame, drag that in, and this is what we're going to use. And because it matches the object, it's easier to work with, and when you don't have like your preview up, you still know what it is, and blah blah blah. So next we want to make sure it's centered to our world, so position 0, y0, x0. Easy if it's not, if everything is not zeroed out and scale is at 111. Easy way to fix is just go up to this cog and select reset. Easy enough. Oh, also if you get like this, it's just hiding the taskbar, so just it's whatever. Next, we want to rename our object because whatever we use to name it might not be appropriate from the original Photoshop file. So we'll just call this explosion placeholder, or whatever you want to call it. Alright, so now that is done. The next step we need to take is creating our timeline control object. This will be essentially, like, if you were to think of this as a movie, which at the end is kind of be, we are creating the movie's director. The director will tell all of the actors, which is the actors you can think of as our animations. He will tell them where to go and like when to do their actions. But we don't want him animated himself, so we're going to put that in now. So if you go to your hierarchy, right click, and select create empty. So now we have what's called game object. Now, just to be on the safe side, just in case anything happens, you might, if yours looks something like this, where your game object or anything is indented in your hierarchy, that means it is now a child of something. In this case, our director game object is a child of our explosion placeholder. The easiest way to fix that is to just click on the game object and drag it up until you see this line, and then just let go of the mouse. It is now its own object again. And vice versa. Later, if you want to link objects, just drag it over and you'll see it highlight everything, and it is now a child of that. But that's not what we want right now. So there we go. And now we want to change the name because game object is too generic. So in the inspector window, just highlight the name and give it a new name. In this case, I will call it timeline control because it is our timeline controller. So, and as you see, it is now no longer zeroed out, and it's just good practice to reset the transforms and everything. So in case yours isn't at 0, 0, 0, just click on the cog and select reset. Next, what we want to do is we want to create our timeline director. So for this, we need the timeline window. If yours is not docked like mine is, simply go up to Window and scroll down until you see Timeline. Click that, it will open it up. And you can see and once I have timeline control selected, if you don't, you just simply start creating timelines, select a game object. So we want it on our timeline control, so we will find it in our hierarchy, select it, and you can see the text now changes to begin a new timeline with timeline control, create a director component, and a timeline asset. So we will create that now. Just click the create button, and it'll ask you to save it. So, put it into whatever folder you like. And I'm just going to stick with the default naming here, timeline control, timeline.playable, but you can call it whatever you like so long as you know what it is and how you'll find it. So just simply click save. If we go to our project window, we will now see this new object here called timeline control timeline. You can set your frame rate here and duration mode based on clips, and we don't need to do any adjustments there, but you can find the object if needed. So back to our timeline window, we now have, just make sure you have timeline control selected. We have two things here we don't want, because as I said earlier, this is the director. We don't want the director in the movie. We don't want him animated. So we're going to remove that stuff. The director's only supposed to tell the actors what to do. If the director's getting into the movie, then, I don't know, they're Quentin Tarantino or something. But that's a different story. So, first off, we will remove our animator component in the inspector window. So you can simply right-click near the name and select Remove Component. Or, if you're having a little trouble with that, just select the cog and Remove Component. Next, we need to remove the animation track from the timeline. So down where it says timeline control here, just select it and right click and delete. So now we have no tracks. The director is ready. Our actors are ready. So let's get the show on the road. Now in our timeline window, we need to click add and scroll down and select animation track. Make sure it's animation, not activation. Activation track will do something else, and it's not something we want at this moment. But it will be useful later on, so remember it. Mostly when we're assembling the whole scene, because we don't want the explosion to always be like rendering in the side or something. So the activation track will be good for that later. Anyway, so we create our animation track, and now you see this little box here says none brackets animator. This is the here we will drag in the game object we want to animate. In this case, our explosion placeholder. This is why we created it in the first place, essentially. We can put as many clips as we want in here, but we need an object to essentially reference it to so it knows where the animation should play in regards to the world space. So, on the screen. So what we do is simply we find our placeholder object, in this case explosion placeholder, click and drag it down into the box itself. You'll see this little arrow up here beside your cursor, and then just let go, and you'll get this window asking to create animator on explosion placeholder. Simply select that, and it is now ready to go. Now, in case it is possible, like you can drag it down and it'll create its own timeline here, but we don't want to do that at the moment. Also, if you click it, as you can see, the timeline window changes and it wants to create a director on their placeholder. We don't want that, so just make sure timeline control is selected. Excuse me about that. I'm very sorry about that. So we are almost done here. Now we need to add in our animation clip, which is in our project window. And with the way I have mine docked, it's a little bit of a trouble to do that. So what I'm going to do is select my timeline. I'm going to click its tab, and I'm going to drag it. As you can see, it's now this little floating window, and it likes to snap wherever. And I can also dock it into other spaces. So for now, I'm just going to dock it in with the scene tab, and boom, we have this now. The reason I'm doing this is just to make this next part a lot easier. So now, with this up, I can find my animation clip, explosion anim, right here, and simply drag it into the same animation track as the explosion placeholder. If I were to drop it here, as you can see, it creates a new track. We don't want that. So I'll just drag it up and into the proper animation, set it to start at 0, and delete the extra one that was created. Now, you might be thinking, oh, perfect, I am all done here. Not quite, because right now there is just the one little issue. With the explosion, this shouldn't be a problem, and just importing it as is, because the explosions are supposed to be quick. You can probably skip this step for now, but it's to keep in mind for the later assets. There is no time information on our animation clip from when we imported it. Essentially, there's every frame will happen almost instantly. To show this, I'll just dock this back down here so we can see our sprite, and as you can see, the sprite on our screen has now changed to our animation. You shouldn't see this with yours, simply because it should be essentially the same, but if for demonstration purposes, this is quite helpful. So I will hit play now. As you see, the animation is extremely quick. So that's so in case that's not what you want, here's how you can edit it. Hover your mouse over your animation clip. You can see here. Right click and select edit in animation window. This will open up the animation window itself, even if you don't have it tabbed. So you don't need to worry about going up to window and finding animation, because you may accidentally click the animator, which is something different. So now we have our animation timeline. We can simply zoom out with the mouse wheel and pan by clicking it. And these little diamonds here are keyframes. So what I want to do is just drag this out and drag this out. And you can test the animation, but as you see, there's a little issue here. Why isn't it playing right? It just kind of stops there. Well, the reason for that is in our timeline, the director has it cutting off early now, and our keyframes actually go past what the current animation is. So to fix that, you can simply hover the mouse until you see it change to this, and drag it out. So now the full duration of my animation now is 35 frames. My timeline is currently set to frames. Yours might be in seconds. Who knows? In this case, you know, it's still the same. And if you drag it further, you'll start seeing these gray little boxes saying like L1, L2, and so on. Basically, this is a box, a full gray box is a full loop of the animation. So I hit play, and it plays through it twice. This is how you can loop the animation easily without having to duplicate it multiple times in your timeline, and without having to select your director and over in playable director here, and under wrap mode, selecting loop. This will have the whole thing loop for you, but you know, this is just a way to extend it in your animation track. But in this case, with the explosion, you only want it happening one time. Alright, so we're just about done here. So now you'll be asking yourself, okay, so I have everything done and everything's all pretty. What do I do next? How do I submit this? Well, first off, actually I forgot something. If you are having any issues with the timeline, you know, like things not animating right or whatnot, make sure you have timeline control selected and the proper timeline is up, because a lot of issues can happen along the way, and if you are having issues with it, the first thing really to do is just select your timeline control or your director or whatever, and go from there. That's the biggest way I found to solve these issues. So to finish this off, let's open our project window again. We're going to need to save the scene and then export it so we can email that out to Noel. Alright, so what we need to do now is, first we go up to File and select Save Scene As. We click that and it'll open up our window, and we can call it whatever we want. So let's call this Explosion Scene, because this name, there's no big deal to it and whatnot. And as you see, it creates this new little object here with the Unity logo. This is our scene. This is what we'll need to submit to Noel, but we can't submit it in this state. So what we want to do is change the name of it. We want to export it. And in case you're wondering, scenes are essentially like levels in Unity. They contain like one section of your game that could be, you know, a level. It could be a menu, cutscenes. You know, it's whatever. Just in case you're curious of it. So now to put this into a format that we can send it out, we simply select the object, the scene object, right click on it, and choose Export Package, and you'll see this little export window. And make sure everything is checked off, because you want to make sure that there's not going to be any bugs or anything when you send it off. So make sure everything is still checked, and simply click Export, and we'll open up a new window here. And you can save it wherever you want. I'm just going to put it in the assets as well. But we want this to have a certain name, because Knoll has a naming convention, and I believe this is the proper one. So the naming convention is fund2du underscore proj1 underscore your first name underscore your last name underscore 01. Now, to explain this real quick, it's the course code Fundamentals 2D Unity Proj 1 Project 1. So next week it would be Project 2, Project 3. Your first name, your last name, simple enough, and then 01. That is your asset number. So if this were a project where we were submitting multiple files, each asset would be 01, 02, 03, and so on. So if there was like 5 explosions, you would have, like, the whole name would be the same, but each of these scenes we submit would be 01, 02, 03, etc. And this will save the type as a Unity package. So click Save. And this essentially creates a zip folder for specific for Unity. So as you see here, I have my file. It is 36 kilobytes, more than small enough to submit by email. And just checking. Yep, if you go back into Unity, you have the smaller box now to show that if you saved it in your assets or anywhere in your Unity project, it'll pop up in your project window. If not, it'll be wherever. So that is all we need for Unity itself. The last thing we need to do would be to submit this to Knoll. To do that, you go into your Trios email, create a new email, address it to Knoll, and give it the same name as the file, except without the asset number. So if we were to look at this, so the email heading would be fund2du underscore proj1 underscore your first name underscore your last name. You stop there. That is your email title. And then simply attach the Unity package to the email and send it out. That is all you need to do, and you will be good to go for the weekend. I hope this was informative, and I hope everyone was able to understand my ramblings, and have a good weekend.